Staying with news at Prime tonight, there have been seismic shifts in local government in many metros in the country as the coalition window closes. For more on this, we're joined by political analyst Sanusha Naidu and local government analyst Amos Goliath. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time tonight. Sanusha, it certainly kept us enthralled, right? No shortage of twists and turns in terms of how the voting and how these councils would ultimately be constituted. What do you make of it all, including just how it has played out amongst the political parties?
Good evening, Kathy, and the viewers. Yes, it was definitely quite a topsy-turvy, very fluid kind of set of events that prevailed in the last 2 weeks. I think we had a lot of uncertainty around whether or not particular parties were going into coalitions. Over the weekend, we saw the DA drop the ball and say they're not supporting Mr. Herman Mashaba. I think what happened in the city of Johannesburg as well as in Ekurhuleni was quite interesting because it actually was Action SA and EFF that strategically aligned and forced the DA into the positions of mayor and deputy speaker. So I think, deputy mayor. So I think what's really interesting as well in these permutations we are seeing is how much the electoral, the political landscape has moved in this kind of fluidity. But again, the uncertainty doesn't necessarily mean that we should be comforted by it, that there's something that's happening there that's going to essentially give us a sense that, oh, this is going to stabilize. I think we're entering into a very unprecedented level of uncertainty around whether these councils, especially the hung councils where we see like what happened in eThekwini now, is whether or not they are stable formations and whether or not they are governing and are they ready to govern.
Amos, very soon the spectacle of it all would have died down, and it comes down to the hard work of having to run effective administrations in these metropolitan municipalities and others across the country. When you look at how the establishment of these councils are taking place, what are some of your concerns in terms of how it may affect service delivery?
Thank you, Kathy. I believe immediately after these events that we have seen in the last 2 weeks, political parties will really go and sit down and draft some guidelines and principles which guides coalitions, because they must be fully aware that the coalitions as they were formed are simply not sustainable and they will not last the test of time. So I think parties will go and sit down and agree on some broad framework which would govern these coalitions. Parties have enough in common from their election manifestos. They all stood for improvement of service delivery, good governance, qualified personnel, prudent financial management. So there are enough issues on which political parties agree, which should enable them to form a proper framework for the coalition. So I don't think it's all lost after the horse trading that we've seen over the last 2 weeks, because I simply don't believe 14 days is sufficient for parties to form meaningful coalitions, to engage each other in those principles and what would guide the coalitions and what are the issues that can be deferred and what are the issues that should be dealt with immediately. And maybe parties should knuckle down from tomorrow or from tonight and already start looking at putting this in place in order for them to sustain these coalitions, because if these coalitions break up soon, there's no guarantee that coalitions that would be formed subsequent to the breakup of the newly formed coalitions would last. And this is why it is so important for them to go and sit down and put ideas to paper and say, this is what we would want to see. And this is the mandate that we received from communities, because I also believe that in the immediate future, we must prepare ourselves for this type of instability. It's not going to be over. It's not going to be over soon. We've seen it since the first local government elections in 2000. We've seen it in 2016 when the big metros were affected. And I think we will continue to see this type of coalition governments. And as I said, 14 days was just not sufficient time for them to do it.
I want to just pick up on this issue of broad frameworks that you believe the parties will have to enter into amongst themselves. when you look at some of the talk, at least what has been said publicly, there seem to be a lot of non-negotiables going around. So parties saying they will absolutely not enter into coalitions unless a particular list of things is guaranteed. Are we likely to see that changing now that this process is somewhat concluded?
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, it has to change. You cannot enter into any coalition with non-negotiables. And I think parties will have to prioritize the local issues and involve the local leaders of parties in these local municipalities of metropolitan municipalities in these discussions. Also, they have to involve communities, be very transparent in what is it that they intend to present in a coalition and what the end objectives that they wish to achieve. Some of the issues are national issues, and parties will have to find ways in dealing with issues that are actually of a national concern, like land issues, etc. So I think for coalitions to succeed, parties will start toning down. I think a lot of what was said in the media was political posturing. Parties will start toning down, and the non-negotiables will have to be negotiated, and parties will have to reach the middle ground. But in this framework, they will also have to agree, how do we deal with these non-negotiables, and where do we negotiate these non-negotiables, and make sure that the business of the council or the municipality does not come to a standstill whilst they are sorting out what is termed to be the non-negotiables.
Sanusha, certainly a lot easier said than done. And, you know, there's been this impression created that for some political parties like the EFF that have been instrumental in giving their vote to help install DA mayors, that they will have some kind of a hold over over the individuals in those positions. How do you see it playing out?
I want to be confident that they will come together, but I'm not so sure that the parties have demonstrated their maturity in this election or the way they behaved. I think the challenge for us is that when you look at particular metros, when you look at particular dimensions, you actually see, as much as it's political posturing and perhaps they were playing to the media in terms of the showcasing and trying to retain this kind of identity that they stick to these rigid lines, that doesn't really bolster trust in the political party. It doesn't bolster confidence in them, because then we as the electorate are putting our lives in their hands and hoping that they'll do the right thing for service delivery, for better governing municipalities, to deal with municipalities that are in serious financial crisis. Just over the weekend, an international credit rating agency downgraded a few municipalities. That's a serious dilemma. Where are you going to get the cash from? How are you going to raise the cash? So I think the challenge for me is, as much as we hope that this is a wake-up call for them, we've been having a lot of wake-up calls for these political parties, but the problem is they see things in very reductionist ways. They see it as a winner-take-all system, because that's the way the electoral system is fashioned, it's predicated. And for me, I think that by getting the DA to have the mayoral positions in Ekurhuleni and in Johannesburg, again, you listen to the tone of the political party response. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see that they too are kind of shocked that they are in that position, because they don't want to be held leveraged over this by the EFF and so forth. So as much as the EFF and the Action SA may have compelled the DA to become more pro-poor, and this is going to be the big test for the political parties, where they are hung councils and where they are governing in minority hung councils where there's no majority, then you got to look at the budgets, because the budgets are going to be key to this. And so how they're going to get to coming to consensus, operationalizing budgets is going to be difficult. So I am not really convinced that this is where we are going. I think we're going to see a lot of fragility. And just listening to the tone that's coming out of political parties, they are caught in the crosshairs of also not understanding how they're going to go forward. Because at the end of the day, the challenge for them is to put their differences aside, leave their
Sure.
egos at the door, and actually get down to governing as opposed to whether or not our ideological differences set us apart.
Political analyst Sanusha Naidu and local government expert Amos Goliath, thank you both for your time tonight.